My sister stole the baby name I'd been planning for years and gave it to her golden retriever. What she didn't know was that I had access to her dream job application at Pinnacle Design Studios before it got submitted, and I was about to teach her a lesson about respect she'd never forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The call came on a Thursday evening while I was working late in my home office in downtown Riverbrook. I'd been reviewing design portfolios for our latest client acquisition when my phone buzzed with Hayley's contact photo, my younger sister grinning in her engagement photos from last spring. "Natalie," she squealed into the phone, that fake excited voice she used when she wanted something or had news she thought would impress me. Guess what David and I just did? I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, already sensing trouble. Hayley had a talent for making decisions that somehow always managed to step on someone else's feelings, usually mine. "What's up, Hay?" "We got a puppy! The most gorgeous golden retriever you've ever seen. She's absolutely perfect. Blonde, fluffy, and so intelligent. We spent hours trying to pick the perfect name and then it hit us. We named her Autumn!" My blood turned to ice. Autumn. The name I'd been planning to use for my first daughter since I was 16 years old. The name I'd mentioned countless times during family dinners, holiday gatherings, and sister heart-to-hearts over the past 12 years. The name that everyone in our family knew was Natalie's future baby name. "You named your dog Autumn?" My voice came out flat, controlled, but inside I was reeling. "Yes, isn't it perfect? She has this gorgeous golden coat that reminds us of autumn leaves, and you know how much David loves fall hiking. Plus, it's such a unique name for a dog. I don't think I've ever heard anyone use it for a pet before." Unique for a pet? Because it was meant for a human being. My human being. My future daughter. "Hayley," I said slowly, "you know that's the name I've always planned to use for my first daughter." There was a pause, then that dismissive little laugh she'd perfected since childhood. "Oh, come on, Nat, you're 32 and single. When are you realistically going to have kids? Besides, it's just a name. There are plenty of other pretty names out there." Just a name. 12 years of planning, dreaming, and sharing that plan with my family, reduced to just a name. And the casual cruelty of pointing out my single status as if it somehow made my future plans invalid. "I've been talking about naming my daughter Autumn since I was 16, Hayley. Everyone in the family knows this." "Well, yes, but that was more like a teenage fantasy, wasn't it? I mean, you're so focused on your little graphic design business and everything. David and I are actually building a real life together. We're the ones who are going to need family names." Her little graphic design business. If only she knew. What Hayley didn't understand, what none of my family understood, was that my little graphic design business had evolved far beyond their comprehension. While they saw me as their struggling older sister who worked from home in yoga pants and couldn't keep a boyfriend, I'd quietly built Crimson Creative Agency into one of the most sought-after design firms on the West Coast. We weren't just doing business cards and wedding invitations anymore. We were handling complete brand transformations for Fortune 500 companies, designing user experiences for major tech startups, and creating marketing campaigns that generated millions in revenue for our clients. Last quarter alone, we'd signed contracts worth $3.2 million. But I deliberately kept my success quiet, operating through multiple LLCs and keeping my personal name off most public-facing materials. I wanted my family to love me for who I was, not what I'd achieved or how much money I was making. I wanted genuine relationships, not people who suddenly became interested in me because of my bank account. The irony was that while Hayley and our parents saw me as the family underachiever, I was actually subsidizing their lifestyles in ways they'd never imagined. The exclusive gym membership Hayley couldn't really afford? My company had partnered with Zenith Fitness, and I'd arranged for family discounts. The wedding venue she'd booked at Grandview Gardens? I'd helped design their new brand identity in exchange for preferred pricing for personal events. Even the apartment complex where she and David lived, Riverside Commons, displayed marketing materials created by my team. They lived in a world I'd helped create, enhanced, and improve, while treating me like the consolation prize sister who just couldn't get her act together. "Look, Natalie," Hayley continued, interpreting my silence as acceptance, "I know you're probably a little disappointed, but you'll understand when you meet Autumn. She's going to be such a big part of our family. David's already talking about getting her professionally trained for agility competitions. We want her to be absolutely perfect." Perfect. She wanted her dog to be perfect, while casually destroying something that had been perfect to me for over a decade. "When do Mom and Dad meet Autumn?" I asked, though I already suspected I knew the answer. "This weekend. We're driving up to Maplewood on Saturday for dinner. Mom's already planning to make her famous pot roast to celebrate our new addition to the family. She's so excited to become a grandmother to a grandpuppy." Grandmother to a grandpuppy named Autumn. The name that should have belonged to their actual future granddaughter was now reserved for a dog who would be getting special celebration dinners and professional training. "That sounds wonderful," I managed to say. "I'm sure everyone will love her." "You should come. I know you're probably busy with work stuff, but family dinner would be perfect for introducing Autumn to everyone." Although, she paused, and I could practically hear her reconsidering, "Maybe it would be better if it's just David and me this first time. We want to make sure Autumn doesn't get overwhelmed with too many new people at once." There it was. Even the dog's introduction to the family was more important than including me. After hanging up, I sat in my office staring out at the city lights of Riverbrook's downtown district. My building, which I owned through one of my investment LLCs, offered a perfect view of the harbor where million-dollar yachts bobbed peacefully in the evening breeze. From my perspective, 40 floors up, I could see the entire life I'd built, successful, profitable, and completely invisible to the people who mattered most to me. Tomorrow, I'd watch Hayley introduce Autumn to our parents, seeing their faces light up with joy over a golden retriever carrying the name I'd treasured for half my life. They'd coo over her tricks, take dozens of photos, and probably start planning elaborate birthday parties for a dog who'd stolen my daughter's identity before she even existed. But what Hayley didn't know, what she was about to find out, was that actions have consequences, and some lessons are more expensive than others. I opened my laptop and pulled up the email I'd received 3 days ago from Amanda Rodriguez, Senior Hiring Manager at Pinnacle Design Studios. The subject line read, "Confidential reference check, Hayley Morrison application." It was time my sister learned that respect isn't optional, and neither am I. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I stared at Amanda Rodriguez's email for several minutes, letting the irony sink in completely. 3 days ago, Pinnacle Design Studios had contacted me for a confidential reference check on my sister's job application. They wanted my professional opinion on Hayley Morrison's suitability for their senior creative director position, the job she'd been obsessing over for 6 months. What made this particularly delicious was that Amanda had no idea Hayley and I were related. She'd reached out to me as N. Blackwood, CEO of Crimson Creative Agency, based on my company's stellar reputation in the design industry. Hayley had listed several high-profile projects on her portfolio that she claimed to have, quote, collaborated on during her brief stint as a freelance consultant. The problem was, those projects were mine, every single one of them. Let me back up and explain how spectacularly my family had misunderstood my life for the past 8 years. After graduating from Westfield College with a degree in graphic design, I'd moved to Riverbrook with big dreams and a small bank account. My parents, Richard and Caroline Morrison, had been supportive but skeptical. "The creative field is so competitive, honey," my mother had said. "Maybe keep your options open for something more stable." Hayley, fresh out of high school and headed to prestige university on a partial scholarship, had been more direct. "I'm glad one of us is being practical about the future. she'd announced at my graduation dinner. Someone in this family needs to make real money eventually. Even then, at 18, she'd positioned herself as the responsible one, the sister with the real plan. I'd started small, freelancing from my studio apartment, taking on local business logos and restaurant menus. My family saw the late nights, the ramen dinners, the secondhand furniture, and concluded I was struggling. They weren't wrong initially. The first 2 years were brutal. But something shifted in year 3. A small startup called TechFlow hired me to design their complete brand identity for what they could afford minus $3,000. 6 months later, TechFlow got acquired by a major corporation for $50 million. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know who had created their, quote, incredibly sophisticated and memorable brand presence. That's when I learned the power of keeping quiet about success. Instead of celebrating publicly or updating my family about the influx of high-paying clients, I made a strategic decision. I'd let them continue seeing me as their struggling artist daughter while I built something extraordinary behind the scenes. I wanted to know who would love and support me when they thought I had nothing to offer except myself. The answer, apparently, was no one. While I was quietly building Crimson Creative Agency into a powerhouse, my family continued treating me like their charity case. Holiday gifts became practical items they thought I needed. Discount store candles, generic gift cards, clearance clothing. Meanwhile, Hayley received jewelry, electronics, and cash contributions toward her future. Family dinners became exercises in subtle condescension. "How's the design work going, sweetie?" my father would ask with that careful tone people use when they're trying to be encouraging about something they consider a hobby. "Getting enough clients to pay the bills? Any interesting projects lately?" My mother would chime in, then immediately pivot to Hayley's internship at Morrison & Associates, no relation despite the shared name, where she was, quote, getting such valuable real-world business experience. Hayley had graduated with a marketing degree and immediately landed what she considered a prestigious position at a mid-tier advertising firm in the city. To hear her tell it, she was revolutionizing their creative department and working on campaigns for major national brands. The reality was slightly different. I knew this because Morrison & Associates had hired Crimson Creative Agency 6 months ago to handle the visual design work for their biggest client presentation. Hayley was listed as a junior account coordinator on the project, essentially administrative support for the actual creative team. But I'd never corrected their misconceptions about my success or her role. I'd simply smiled and nodded while they celebrated her rising star status and worried about my unstable creative career. The truth was that Crimson Creative Agency now employed 47 people across 3 offices. We had clients in 12 countries and had won industry awards that I kept private. Last year alone, our net profit exceeded $4.2 million, and we were on track to double that this year. I owned my downtown building, drove a Tesla that I kept garaged to avoid questions, and had investment properties in 4 states. My art collection included pieces that would make my family's jaws drop, and my travel schedule included first-class flights to meetings in Paris, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo, trips I described as work conferences when anyone bothered to ask. Meanwhile, Hayley and David lived in a trendy but expensive apartment they could barely afford, drove cars with monthly payments that stretched their budget, and relied on credit cards to maintain their social lifestyle. She'd been trying to break into senior-level creative positions for 2 years, but kept getting rejected, unable to understand why her extensive portfolio wasn't opening doors. The portfolio that featured my work. See, during her brief 3-month freelance consulting period last year, a gap between jobs that she'd romanticized as building my own brand, Hayley had convinced several mutual acquaintances to let her collaborate on their design projects. What she'd actually done was connect them with my studio, while taking a finder's fee and co-credit on the final deliverables. She'd presented this to our family as proof of her entrepreneurial spirit and creative talent. "I'm building such valuable industry connections," she'd announced over Sunday brunch. "My clients keep referring me to bigger and better projects." What she'd actually built was a portfolio of my company's work with her name attached as creative consultant or project collaborator. She had no idea that the mysterious N. Blackwood behind these acclaimed campaigns was her supposedly unsuccessful older sister. And now, Pinnacle Design Studios, the company Hayley had been dreaming of joining since graduating, wanted my professional assessment of her qualifications for their senior creative director role. The position came with a $150,000 salary, full benefits, equity options, and the kind of industry recognition Hayley craved. It was exactly the career breakthrough she'd been working toward, the job that would finally prove to our family that she was the successful Morrison sister. Amanda's email was respectfully worded but direct. "We'd appreciate your candid assessment of Ms. Morrison's creative capabilities, leadership potential, and the accuracy of her claimed contributions to the attached portfolio pieces. Your reputation in the industry makes your perspective invaluable to our decision-making process." I could give Hayley a glowing recommendation. I could stay silent and let Pinnacle discover her actual skill level during the interview process. Or I could tell them exactly what kind of creative collaborator my sister really was. But first, I had a weekend family dinner to endure, where I'd watch my parents fawn over a golden retriever named Autumn, while Hayley basked in their pride over her promising career trajectory. After that celebration of everything my family valued, Hayley's success, her engagement, her ability to make practical life choices, and now her new puppy with my daughter's name, I'd decide exactly how honest my reference letter would be. Some lessons, I reflected as I closed my laptop for the night, are more educational than others. Saturday morning arrived with an email notification that made my decision crystal clear. Amanda Rodriguez had sent a follow-up message with an urgent timeline. "Ms. Blackwood, we need your reference by Monday morning as we're finalizing our candidate selection. Ms. Morrison is currently our top choice, but your input will significantly influence our final decision." Top choice. Hayley was their top choice for a $150,000 senior creative position based on a portfolio that was entirely my work, and they needed my blessing to hand her the career she'd been dreaming about while casually destroying something I'd treasured for 12 years. I spent the morning crafting my response with the same precision I applied to my most important client presentations. Every word was carefully chosen, every sentence designed to deliver maximum impact while maintaining complete professional integrity. "Dear Ms. Rodriguez," I began, my fingers moving steadily across the keyboard. "Thank you for reaching out regarding Ms. Hayley Morrison's application for the Senior Creative Director position. I appreciate the opportunity to provide insight into her professional capabilities and the accuracy of her portfolio submissions." I paused, considering my next words carefully. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth and consequences. After reviewing the portfolio pieces Ms. Morrison has submitted, I must clarify several important points regarding her actual role in these projects. The campaigns attributed to her, quote, creative leadership were produced entirely by Crimson Creative Agency under my direct supervision and execution. Ms. Morrison's involvement was limited to client referrals, for which she received finder's fees. I detailed each project systematically. The TechFlow rebrand that had launched my company's reputation? Hayley had introduced them to me at a networking event and earned a $500 referral bonus. The Meridian Hotels campaign that won 3 industry awards? She'd forwarded their inquiry email to my studio and requested co-credit in exchange for the connection. The Zenith Fitness brand identity that had been featured in Design Excellence magazine? Hayley had no creative input whatsoever. She'd simply been dating someone who worked there and made the introduction. Ms. Morrison's portfolio represents her success as a business development connector rather than as a creative director or designer. The strategic thinking, visual execution, and creative problem-solving evident in these pieces originated from my team. To clarify the scope of her contributions, she has never led a creative team, developed a design strategy, or produced original creative work for any of the referenced projects. I included specific details that only the actual creator would know: color palette reasoning, typography choices, client revision histories, and strategic decision-making processes. Information that would be impossible for Hayley to explain if questioned during her interview. Based on her actual skill set and experience level, I would estimate Ms. Morrison's qualifications align more closely with a junior account coordinator or business development associate role, not a senior creative leadership position. Her strengths lie in networking and client relationship facilitation, not in the strategic creative direction this position requires. I concluded with professional courtesy but unmistakable clarity. I hope this information assists in your evaluation process. Please feel free to contact me if you require additional details about any of the referenced projects or Ms. Morrison's specific contributions to them. After reading through the email 3 times, I hit send at exactly 11:47 a.m., just as I was preparing to leave for the family dinner where I'd meet Autumn, the golden retriever wearing my daughter's name. The drive to Maplewood took 45 minutes through rolling countryside that reminded me of everything I'd loved about growing up in our family's suburban haven. My parents still lived in the same colonial house where Hayley and I had shared bedrooms, fought over bathroom time, and dreamed about our futures during late-night sister talks. Those talks seemed like ancient history now. I pulled into the familiar driveway behind David's silver Honda Civic, noting the new dent in the rear bumper and the expired inspection sticker. Their financial struggles were subtle but visible if you knew what to look for: delayed car maintenance, generic brand groceries, David's work shirts showing wear around the collar and cuffs. Before I could knock, the front door burst open and my mother appeared, practically vibrating with excitement. "Natalie! Perfect timing! Come meet Autumn. She's absolutely precious." The golden retriever bounded toward me, all golden fur and enthusiastic tail wagging, wearing a pink collar with silver letters spelling out Autumn in elegant script. She was undeniably beautiful, friendly, and completely innocent of the emotional devastation her name represented. "Isn't she gorgeous?" Hayley emerged from the kitchen, beaming with pride. "David and I spent 3 hours at Petland yesterday getting all her supplies. Look at this adorable little jacket we bought her." She held up a tiny denim vest embroidered with autumn leaves. My parents cooed appreciatively while I forced a smile and petted the dog who'd inherited my future daughter's identity. "She's lovely," I managed, meaning it about the dog while hating everything else about the situation. "The name suits her perfectly," my father added, scratching behind Autumn's ears. "Such a unique choice for a pet. Where did you two come up with it?" Hayley and David exchanged that sickeningly sweet look couples share when they're about to tell a story they find adorable. "Well," Hayley began, "we were brainstorming names for hours, throwing out everything from Luna to Bella to Copper. Nothing felt right. Then David looked at her golden coat in the sunlight and said she reminded him of autumn leaves, and it just clicked. Autumn! Perfect for our perfect girl." No mention of the fact that I'd been planning to use that name for over a decade. No acknowledgement that everyone in this room had heard me talk about my future daughter Autumn countless times. Just casual erasure of 12 years of dreams, repackaged as their spontaneous moment of inspiration. "It's such a pretty name," my mother gushed, "and so original. I don't think I've ever heard anyone use Autumn for a dog before." "That's what makes it special," Hayley agreed. "We wanted something meaningful, not just another typical dog name." I watched this performance with fascination, wondering if Hayley had genuinely convinced herself that stealing my chosen baby name was somehow original thinking, or if she was simply that comfortable with rewriting history when it suited her narrative. "Dinner's almost ready," my mother announced. "Hayley, why don't you tell Natalie about your exciting job interview this week?" Hayley's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Oh my God, Nat, I haven't had a chance to tell you. Remember how I've been trying to get into Pinnacle Design Studios? They finally called me for an interview. It's for a senior creative director position, exactly what I've been working toward." That's wonderful, I said, genuinely curious to see how she'd describe her qualifications. What convinced them to interview you? My portfolio, obviously. All those collaborative projects I worked on last year really paid off. The hiring manager said my creative vision and strategic thinking were exactly what they're looking for in a senior role. My creative vision. My strategic thinking. Presented as her qualifications for a job that would change her life. The interview is Tuesday, she continued, practically glowing with excitement. David took the day off work to help me prepare. We've been practicing presentation scenarios all week. I'm so proud of her, David added, wrapping his arm around Hayley's waist. She's worked so hard to build her reputation in the industry. This position would be perfect for her skill set. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Amanda Rodriguez, responding to my reference letter. Ms. Blackwood, thank you for this detailed and illuminating feedback. This information significantly changes our assessment of Ms. Morrison's candidacy. We'll be conducting a much more thorough evaluation of her actual qualifications before proceeding. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, watching Hayley scratch Autumn behind the ears while describing her career ambitions to our parents. She had no idea that her dream job had just slipped away, killed by the truth about her own deception. You know what? I said suddenly, surprising everyone, including myself. I think this calls for a celebration. Let me contribute something special to dinner. Oh, that's not necessary, honey, my mother protested. You're our guest. I insist. I was already pulling out my phone. There's a new gourmet market in Riverbrook that does same-day delivery. Their selection is supposed to be incredible. What I didn't mention was that Harvest and Home Gourmet was owned by one of my clients, and I could arrange for their premium celebration package to arrive within 2 hours. Sometimes it paid to have connections that your family knew nothing about. As I placed the order for champagne, artisanal desserts, and premium appetizers, I watched Hayley play with the dog who'd stolen my daughter's name while planning to interview for a job built on stolen work. Some lessons, I thought, as my phone confirmed the delivery, were about to become very educational indeed. The gourmet delivery arrived precisely at 6:30 p.m., transforming our casual family dinner into an unexpectedly elegant affair. As I watched my parents' faces light up at the sight of imported French cheeses, Belgian chocolates, and a bottle of Dom Perignon that cost more than most people's monthly car payments, I found myself reflecting on how we'd reached this point, where love felt conditional on success, and success had to be hidden to preserve any hope of genuine affection. Growing up, Hayley and I had been genuinely close. She was only 2 years younger, but those 2 years felt like a lifetime when we were children. I was the protective older sister who taught her to ride a bike, helped her with homework, and defended her against playground bullies. She was my built-in best friend, the person who shared my secrets and adventures. Our parents, Richard and Caroline Morrison, were loving but had very specific ideas about success and security. Dad worked as a regional manager for an insurance company. Stable, predictable, with clear advancement paths and reliable benefits. Mom had been a high school English teacher before staying home with us, then returned to work as a school administrator when we were older. They valued education, steady income, and what they called sensible life choices. When we were teenagers, our different personalities began to crystallize into what would become our adult identities. Hayley was social, organized, and naturally drawn to activities that impressed adults. She was student council president, honor society member, and the daughter who brought home report cards that got displayed on the refrigerator with pride. I was creative, independent, and more interested in spending hours drawing or designing posters for school events than in accumulating the kind of achievements that translated well at dinner parties. My artistic talents were acknowledged and even praised, but always with an underlying concern about their practical application. Art is wonderful, sweetheart, my mother would say, but you need to think about how you'll support yourself. Maybe you could teach art, or work for an advertising agency with a steady salary and benefits. The message was clear. Creativity was acceptable as a hobby or supplement to real work, but not as a foundation for life. When I announced my intention to major in graphic design, my parents responded with what I now recognize as loving worry disguised as practical concern. "Are you sure about this path, honey? The arts are so competitive. Maybe a business degree with an art minor would give you more options?" Hayley, meanwhile, had declared her marketing major with family approval and excitement. "Marketing is such a smart choice," my father had said proudly. "It combines creativity with business sense. You'll have so many opportunities." Even then, I noticed the difference in their responses. Hayley's choices were smart and strategic. Mine were risky and uncertain. This pattern continued through college and into our early careers. When Hayley landed her first job at Morrison & Associates, our parents hosted a celebration dinner and called their friends to share the news. When I started freelancing from my studio apartment, they worried about my lack of health insurance and asked gentle questions about my backup plan. The turning point came during my third year of building Crimson Creative Agency. I just signed 3 major corporate clients in 1 month, and my revenue had jumped from barely covering expenses to genuine profitability. I was finally earning more than Hayley at her stable corporate job, but I'd made the strategic decision not to share specific numbers or client names with my family. At first, this choice was motivated by modesty and a genuine desire to avoid seeming boastful. But as my success grew and my family's assumptions about my struggles remained unchanged, the dynamic became more complex. I began to realize that their concern for my financial stability was paired with a subtle but unmistakable relief that at least one daughter wasn't threatening to outshine the other. Family gatherings became exercises in careful navigation. I'd listen to detailed updates about Hayley's promotions, raises, and career achievements, while deflecting questions about my own work, with vague responses about keeping busy and working on interesting projects. The pattern was so established that when Hayley got engaged to David 2 years ago, I wasn't surprised to be asked to help with wedding planning rather than being consulted about major decisions. "You're so artistic, Nat," Hayley had said. "Could you maybe design some simple invitations? Nothing too elaborate. We're trying to keep costs reasonable." Simple invitations. For the sister who was quietly earning more in a month than her entire wedding budget. But I'd said yes, just as I'd said yes to designing their engagement party programs, their save-the-date cards, and their rehearsal dinner menus. I'd watched my work contribute to their perfect celebration, while listening to relatives praise Hayley's successful career and ask me when I was going to find my direction. The baby name situation was different, though. That crossed a line I hadn't even realized existed until it was obliterated. Autumn hadn't been just a name I liked. It had been a cornerstone of my future identity as a mother. From the time I was 16, whenever I'd imagined having children, my first daughter was always Autumn. I'd written the name in school notebooks, practiced different middle name combinations, and even researched its etymology and meaning during college. More importantly, I'd shared this dream openly and repeatedly with my family. Birthday dinners where I'd joked about future baby Autumn. Holiday conversations where my mother would tease me about grandchildren and I'd respond, "Well, when Autumn arrives someday." Family game nights where we'd play hypothetical scenarios and I'd always mention when I have my daughter Autumn. It wasn't a secret or a passing fancy. It was a well-established family fact. Natalie planned to name her first daughter Autumn, which made Hayley's choice to give that name to her golden retriever particularly devastating. She hadn't forgotten or overlooked my attachment to the name. She deliberately appropriated it while dismissing my future plans as irrelevant fantasies. "You're 32 and single," she'd said, as if my relationship status somehow invalidated my right to dream about motherhood. "When are you realistically going to have kids?" The casual cruelty of that comment had stunned me. Not only had she stolen something precious to me, but she'd justified it by suggesting my life goals were unrealistic compared to her more practical timeline. As I watched my parents fawn over the dog now wearing my daughter's name, I realized this wasn't really about a pet or even about a name. It was about respect, boundaries, and the fundamental question of whether my dreams mattered as much as Hayley's immediate desires. For 12 years, I'd prioritized family harmony over honest communication about my success. I'd allowed them to see me as struggling and uncertain because I'd wanted their love to be unconditional rather than based on achievements or financial status. But what I discovered was that unconditional love apparently didn't extend to unconditional respect. They loved me enough to worry about my stability and include me in family gatherings, but not enough to consider my feelings before making decisions that affected dreams I'd shared with them for over a decade. The reference letter I'd sent to Amanda Rodriguez wasn't really about sabotaging Hayley's job interview. It was about finally insisting that actions have consequences and that respect, like success, isn't something you can fake indefinitely. As we sat down to dinner with my surprise gourmet contributions, I watched Hayley feed Autumn scraps of imported cheese while describing her excitement about Tuesday's interview. She had no idea that her dream job was already slipping away, killed by the truth about her own professional deception. But more than that, she had no idea that her sister, the one she'd dismissed as unmarried and unrealistic, was about to teach her some very expensive lessons about the difference between taking credit and earning it. Tuesday morning brought the call I'd been expecting, though the desperation in Hayley's voice still caught me off guard. I was in my office at 7:15 a.m., reviewing quarterly projections with my lead project manager, when my phone rang with an urgency that suggested panic. "Natalie?" Hayley's voice was shrill, barely controlled. "Something terrible happened with my Pinnacle interview. I need to talk to you right now." I excused myself from the meeting and stepped into my private office, settling into my chair with the city skyline spread out before me. "What's wrong, Hay?" They completely blindsided me. The interview started normally, you know. They were asking about my experience, my creative process, the usual stuff. Then Amanda Rodriguez, the hiring manager, started asking really specific questions about my portfolio pieces. I kept my voice carefully neutral. "What kind of specific questions?" "Like really detailed stuff about design decisions and strategic thinking that I wasn't prepared for." She wanted to know about color psychology choices for the TechFlow rebrand and the reasoning behind typography selections for the Meridian Hotels campaign. Technical stuff that wasn't in any of the prep materials I'd studied. Technical stuff that only the actual designer would know, I thought, but said, "That does sound challenging." "Challenging?" Hayley's voice cracked. "Natalie, it was humiliating. I couldn't answer half their questions. And then, oh, God, then Amanda said something that made no sense. She said they'd received some concerns about the accuracy of my portfolio claims, and they needed to verify my actual role in those projects. My coffee suddenly tasted more bitter. Concerns from who? That's what I asked. She wouldn't tell me specifics, just said they'd been contacted by someone with direct knowledge of the projects. Someone who questioned whether I'd actually been the creative lead on any of them. The silence stretched between us as I processed what this meant. Amanda had used my reference letter exactly as I'd intended, not as a weapon of destruction, but as a tool for truth-telling that forced an honest evaluation. "What did you tell them?" I asked. I tried to explain about collaboration and how creative work is always a team effort, but they kept pushing for details I didn't have. They asked me to walk through my creative process for the Zenith Fitness brand identity, step by step, and I couldn't do it convincingly. Because you had no creative process for that project, I thought. You made a phone call and collected a finder's fee. "I'm sure you did your best under pressure," I offered, though the words felt hollow. My best wasn't good enough. The panic in her voice was escalating. "Natalie, They practically accused me of lying on my application. They said someone had provided very detailed information about my actual contributions to those projects, and that my claims didn't match the reality of my involvement. She was crying now, soft sniffles that made me remember the little sister who used to come to me when she was scared or hurt. For a moment, I felt the familiar pull to comfort and protect her, the instinct that had defined our relationship for so many years. What exactly did they say about your contributions? They said my role appeared to be limited to client referrals and business development, not creative leadership. They had specific details, Nat. Like, they knew about the finder's fees and everything. How could they possibly know that unless someone told them? The question hung in the air like an accusation, though she hadn't yet connected the dots to me. Maybe one of your clients mentioned it during their own reference check? I suggested, testing how much she'd figured out. That's what I thought at first, but none of those clients even knew I was applying to Pinnacle. And besides, Amanda said the information came from someone in the industry with direct knowledge of the actual creative process, someone who could describe design decisions and strategic thinking that I couldn't explain myself. My heart rate picked up slightly. She was getting closer to the truth, but not quite there yet. Hayley, maybe this is just a misunderstanding that can be cleared up. Did they give you a chance to provide additional references or clarification? They said they'd be in touch after reviewing all the information they'd received. But Natalie, the way Amanda looked at me when I left, I don't think I'm getting this job. My dream job, the position I've been working toward for 2 years, and someone sabotaged me. Sabotaged. The word stung because it wasn't entirely inaccurate, even though I preferred to think of it as truth-telling. I'm sure whoever provided that information thought they were being helpful by ensuring accuracy, I said carefully. Helpful? Hayley's voice turned sharp. How is destroying my career opportunities helpful? Someone deliberately undermined me, and I need to figure out who it was and why they'd do something so malicious. Malicious. There was that word that made my chest tighten with a combination of guilt and defensiveness. Was it malicious to tell the truth about her qualifications? Or was it malicious to let her continue building a career on false pretenses? Have you talked to Mom and Dad about this? I asked, partly to change the subject, and partly because I was genuinely curious about their reaction. I called them last night. They're furious on my behalf. Dad said he's never heard of anything so unprofessional, and Mom thinks I should consider legal action for defamation or something. They want to have a family meeting this weekend to figure out how to handle this. A family meeting. To strategize about how to overcome the consequences of Hayley's professional deception, without anyone apparently questioning whether those consequences might be deserved. What did David say? He's been amazing, actually. He took yesterday off work to be there when I got home from the interview, and he's been researching industry contacts who might know someone at Pinnacle. He thinks we can figure out who provided the negative information and potentially file a complaint. The irony was overwhelming. They were planning to investigate and potentially take action against the person who'd told the truth about Hayley's qualifications, while never questioning whether her portfolio claims had been accurate in the first place. Hayley, I said slowly, can I ask you something directly? Of course. Were your portfolio claims completely accurate? I mean, when you described your role as creative lead on those projects, were you being entirely truthful about your contributions? The silence that followed was telling. It lasted long enough for me to count 5 heartbeats before she responded. That's not... Look, the creative industry is collaborative. Everyone knows that. When you're working on team projects, the lines between individual contributions get blurred. I facilitated those relationships. I provided strategic input. I was part of the creative process. Strategic input. Creative process. She was using industry buzzwords to avoid admitting that her actual role had been making introductions and cashing checks. But were you the creative lead? Did you make the design decisions and develop the strategic concepts? Another pause. Natalie, why are you asking me this? You sound like you're questioning me too. The defensiveness in her voice confirmed what I already knew. She couldn't answer directly because the truth would expose the foundation of lies her career ambitions were built on. "I'm not questioning you, Hay. I'm just trying to understand what happened so I can help you figure out next steps." What happened is that someone with a grudge decided to destroy my opportunity by spreading lies about my qualifications. Someone who apparently knows enough about those projects to sound credible, but who's deliberately misrepresenting my role to make me look incompetent. Lies. She was calling the truth about her contributions lies, while maintaining that her false claims were legitimate descriptions of collaborative work. Have you considered that whoever contacted Pinnacle might genuinely believe they were providing accurate information? Accurate? Her voice rose again. There's nothing accurate about claiming I was just some kind of middleman who collected finder's fees. I was a creative collaborator on those projects, and anyone suggesting otherwise is either misinformed or deliberately trying to hurt me. The conversation was spiraling into territory where I'd either have to lie outright or reveal my role in her interview disaster. Neither option felt comfortable, but I found myself leaning toward honesty, despite the inevitable explosion that would follow. "Hayley, what if the person who contacted Pinnacle was someone who actually worked on those projects? Someone who had first-hand knowledge of the creative process and your actual involvement? That's impossible. The only people who knew the full scope of my contributions were the clients themselves, and like I said, they don't even know I applied to Pinnacle." She was so close to understanding, yet still miles away from accepting responsibility. "What about the actual designers and creative teams who worked on those projects? What about them? They wouldn't have any reason to sabotage my career. Most of them don't even know who I am." That sentence hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. The actual creative teams didn't know who she was because her involvement had been peripheral at best. She'd collected credit for work she'd never been meaningfully involved in creating. "Natalie, I need your help figuring this out. You know people in the creative industry, right? Maybe you could ask around, see if anyone's heard rumors about me or knows who might have contacted Pinnacle." The request was so absurd, I almost laughed. She wanted me to investigate myself, to help her identify and potentially retaliate against the person who'd told the truth about her professional deception. "I'll see what I can find out," I said, meaning it in a way she couldn't possibly understand. Thursday afternoon brought an email that would shatter any remaining doubt about my identity and force my family to confront a reality they'd spent years avoiding. Amanda Rodriguez had sent a follow-up message that changed everything. "Ms. Blackwood, given the discrepancies we discovered during Ms. Morrison's interview, we'd like to invite you to present the actual creative process behind these acclaimed projects to our executive team. Would you be available for a presentation next week? We're particularly interested in discussing potential collaboration opportunities with Crimson Creative Agency." They wanted to meet me, not as an anonymous reference provider, but as the actual creative force behind the work Hayley had been claiming as her own. The irony was perfect. My sister's failed attempt to steal credit for my work had opened the door to exactly the kind of high-profile industry recognition I'd been avoiding. I spent Friday morning preparing a comprehensive presentation that would leave no doubt about who had created the campaigns in question. Every design decision, every strategic choice, every revision and refinement, I had documentation for all of it. Client emails praising specific elements, award submissions with my name attached, invoices from my company, even time-stamped design files showing the evolution of concepts from initial sketches to final execution. But before I could decide whether to take this meeting, I needed to give my family one more chance to handle this situation with dignity. I crafted an email to Hayley that was professional, clear, and undeniably devastating. "Hi, Hayley. I've been thinking about our conversation regarding your Pinnacle interview situation. I believe I may have some information that could help clarify what happened. Would you be available to meet this weekend? I think it's time we had an honest conversation about your portfolio and professional credentials. Natalie?" Her response came within minutes. "Yes. Can you come to Mom and Dad's on Saturday? We're all meeting to discuss this situation and figure out our next steps. If you have information about who sabotaged my interview, we need to know immediately. This person has damaged my reputation and potentially my entire career. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that would have felt ironic if it weren't so fitting. I drove to Maplewood, carrying a leather portfolio containing 8 years of my professional life. Contracts, correspondence, design files, award certificates, and financial records that would prove beyond any doubt that Crimson Creative Agency was my company and those acclaimed projects were my work. I also brought printed copies of every email exchange I'd had with the clients Hayley claimed to have collaborated with, including the specific terms of her finder's fee arrangements and their clear statements about her limited role in the creative process. My parents' house felt different this time. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been present during last weekend's casual dinner. This was a war council, not a family gathering. David answered the door, his usually friendly demeanor replaced by something more guarded. "Natalie, thanks for coming. Hayley said you might have information about what happened with her interview?" "I do," I said simply, following him into the living room where my parents and Hayley were already assembled. Autumn was nowhere to be seen. Apparently this conversation was too serious for canine distractions. Hayley looked tired, stressed, and angry in a way I hadn't seen since we were teenagers, fighting over borrowed clothes and broken curfews. "Nat, please tell me you found out who did this to me." I sat down across from them, placing my portfolio on the coffee table between us. I did find out who provided the information to Pinnacle Design Studios. The relief on their faces was immediate and obvious. My father leaned forward expectantly. "Who was it? Do we know them? Was it someone with a personal grudge?" "It was someone with direct, first-hand knowledge of every project in Hayley's portfolio," I said carefully. "Someone who could provide specific details about the creative process, design decisions, and strategic thinking because they were personally responsible for all of it." My mother frowned. "I don't understand. Who else would have that kind of detailed knowledge?" I opened my portfolio and withdrew the first document, a signed contract between Crimson Creative Agency and TechFlow, dated 3 years ago, with my signature at the bottom as creative director and CEO. The person who contacted Pinnacle was me. The silence that followed was profound. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower, the almost inaudible hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, but from my family nothing but stunned silence. Hayley was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "What? I own Crimson Creative Agency. I created every single project in your portfolio. You had no creative input on any of them beyond making initial client introductions." I began laying out documents systematically, the Meridian Hotel's contract with my signature and company letterhead, email exchanges with Zenith Fitness executives discussing design concepts in technical detail that only the actual designer would know, award certificates made out to N. Blackwood, Creative Director, Crimson Creative Agency, invoice after invoice showing payments made to my company for creative services. "This is impossible," David said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Hayley showed us her contracts and correspondence from these projects." "Finder's fee agreements," I corrected, pulling out copies of the actual documents Hayley had signed. She received between $500 and $2,000 for each client referral, with co-credit listed as Business Development Consultant or Client Relations Coordinator. Not Creative Lead, not Strategic Director, not Primary Designer. Hayley was staring at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. But you do graphic design from your apartment, small business logos and wedding invitations." "I did that 8 years ago when I was starting out. Crimson Creative Agency now employs 47 people across 3 offices. We generated $4.2 million in revenue last year and we're on track to exceed $8 million this year." I pulled out my company's latest quarterly report, the professional photos of our downtown headquarters, the list of Fortune 500 clients we'd worked with in the past 12 months. Natalie, my mother said slowly, are you telling us you're a millionaire? I'm telling you that the daughter you've been worried about financially for the past 8 years actually owns one of the most successful creative agencies on the West Coast. My father picked up one of the award certificates, reading it carefully. Regional Design Excellence Award, Best Brand Identity Campaign, presented to Natalie Blackwood, and Crimson Creative Agency for the Meridian Hotels project. The same project Hayley claimed creative leadership on during her Pinnacle interview, I confirmed. Hayley suddenly exploded into motion, reaching for the documents scattered across the coffee table. This doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't you tell us? Why would you let everyone think you were struggling if you were actually successful? Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I've achieved. I wanted authentic relationships based on genuine care, not impressed reactions to my bank account. But you sabotaged my career, her voice was rising toward hysteria. You deliberately destroyed my chance at this job. I told the truth about your qualifications, nothing more, nothing less. David was studying a client email chain, his expression growing more troubled by the minute. Hayley, this correspondence is between Natalie's company and the client directly. There's no mention of you being involved in the creative process at all. Because creative work is collaborative, she insisted, though the argument sounded hollow even to her. I was part of the team. You were a referral source, I corrected, a valuable one, and you were compensated fairly for that service. But you were never part of the creative team, and you certainly weren't the strategic lead on any of these projects. My mother was holding a photo of our office building, shaking her head in disbelief. Honey, this building? It says here that Crimson Creative owns the entire 15th floor. We own the building, I said quietly, all 47 floors. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Their daughter, the one they'd been gently worrying about for nearly a decade, owned a skyscraper in downtown Riverbrook. I don't understand any of this, Hayley said, and for the first time she sounded more confused than angry. If you're this successful, why didn't you ever say anything? Why let us think you were barely getting by? Because every time I achieved something, you achieved something bigger that got celebrated more enthusiastically. When I graduated college, you got accepted to graduate school. When I landed my first big client, you got your first promotion. I wanted to see if anyone would be proud of me just for trying, not just for winning. The truth was more complex than that, but it was the part one felt safe sharing. And instead of being proud, I continued, you took my money to fund your dream party, then decided I wasn't successful enough to attend. You stole the name I'd been planning to use for my daughter and gave it to your dog. You built your career portfolio on my work, then acted like my future plans were unrealistic fantasies. I began gathering the documents back into my portfolio. So when Pinnacle asked for my professional opinion about your qualifications, I gave them the truth. Nothing malicious, nothing vindictive. Just facts about who actually created the work you were claiming credit for. The room fell silent again as the full implications settled over them. Hayley's dream job was gone because she'd been caught lying about her qualifications. But more than that, their entire understanding of our family dynamics had been shattered. Their successful daughter was a fraud, and their failure daughter was a millionaire who'd been quietly supporting them for years while they looked down on her choices. The reckoning, I realized, was just beginning. The aftermath of my revelation unfolded in stages, like watching a building collapse in slow motion. First came the denial, then the desperate attempts to minimize what they'd just learned, and finally the coordinated effort to somehow restore the family dynamic they'd spent years constructing around their fundamental misunderstanding of who I was. My father was the first to attempt damage control. Natalie, sweetheart, this is incredible news. We had no idea you'd achieved this level of success. We're so proud of you. The word proud hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished fire. proud now that they knew my net worth, proud now that my achievements couldn't be ignored or diminished. But where had that pride been when they thought I was struggling? "We've always been proud of you," my mother added quickly, sensing the brittleness in my silence. "Your creativity, your independence, your determination to follow your own path. We just worried about your financial stability, but obviously that was unnecessary." Hayley sat frozen, staring at the documents scattered across the coffee table as if they might somehow rearrange themselves into a different reality. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "I still don't understand why you kept this a secret from your own family." "Because of exactly this," I said, gesturing to their faces. "The way you're all looking at me now, like I've suddenly become a different person. I'm the same person I was an hour ago when you thought I was unsuccessful. The only thing that's changed is your perception." David cleared his throat uncomfortably. "But Natalie, surely you can understand why this is shocking. We've been worried about you for years, and meanwhile you've been—" He trailed off, apparently struggling to find words for the magnitude of my hidden success. "Meanwhile I've been what? Building a business? Creating jobs? Earning recognition in my industry? Yes, I have been doing all of that while you've been worried about whether I could pay my rent." My mother leaned forward with that expression she'd perfected during my childhood, the one that said she was about to deliver wisdom that would solve everything. "Honey, I think we need to focus on moving forward as a family. Now that we understand the situation better, we can support each other properly." Support each other properly, as if the issue had been inadequate support rather than fundamental disrespect. "What does that look like, Mom? Supporting each other properly?" "Well, for starters, we need to address the situation with Pinnacle Design Studios," my father interjected, his business management background taking over. "There might be a way to salvage Hayley's opportunity there, especially now that we know you have such a strong relationship with the industry." I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. They were already strategizing about how to use my revealed success to solve Hayley's problems, the same problems that had resulted from her professional dishonesty. "Dad, what exactly are you suggesting?" "Maybe you could contact Amanda Rodriguez directly, explain that there was a misunderstanding about Hayley's portfolio, perhaps arrange for her to have another interview, with your recommendation this time." The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted me to use my professional reputation to help Hayley recover from the consequences of claiming credit for my work. Hayley suddenly came to life, seizing on this possibility. "That could work, couldn't it?" You could tell them that my role was bigger than it appeared in the documentation, that the collaborative nature of our work made it hard to separate individual contributions. "You want me to lie to a potential client about your qualifications?" "Not lie," she said quickly, "just clarify. Provide context that makes my contributions more clear." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "That sounds perfectly reasonable. You know how these business situations can be complicated by paperwork that doesn't tell the whole story." I looked around the room at my family, my father strategizing, my mother encouraging, David nodding thoughtfully, and Hayley watching me with desperate hope. They were treating this like a problem-solving session, a family crisis that could be managed with the right approach and adequate spin. None of them seemed to grasp that Hayley had committed professional fraud, or that they were asking me to become complicit in that fraud by vouching for qualifications she didn't possess. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You want me to contact Pinnacle Design Studios and tell them that Hayley actually did have creative leadership responsibilities on projects that she objectively had no creative input on whatsoever." "When you put it like that, it sounds worse than it is," David said. "But in reality, creative work is collaborative. Hayley did facilitate those client relationships, and without her connections, those projects might never have happened." Facilitating client relationships is business development, not creative direction. They're completely different skill sets with completely different responsibilities and salary levels. "But surely there's some middle ground," my mother pressed. "Some way to present Hayley's contributions that accurately reflects her value while addressing Pinnacle's concerns." "Middle ground. They wanted me to find a middle ground between truth and fiction that would salvage Hayley's career prospects without requiring her to acknowledge the fundamental dishonesty of her portfolio claims. "Here's the middle ground," I said. "Hayley applies for business development positions that match her actual experience and skill set. She stops claiming creative credits for work she didn't do. She builds a legitimate portfolio based on her real contributions to projects." The suggestion landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples of uncomfortable silence. "Those positions don't pay nearly as much," Hayley said finally, "and they don't have the same growth potential or industry recognition. They pay what she's qualified to earn based on her actual experience." My father frowned. "Natalie, you're being quite harsh about this. Hayley made some presentation mistakes during a high-pressure interview situation. That doesn't mean she's unqualified for creative work." Presentation mistakes. They were reframing professional fraud as interview nerves. "Dad, she couldn't answer basic questions about design decisions because she wasn't involved in making those decisions. She couldn't walk through her creative process because she didn't have a creative process for those projects." This wasn't about interview anxiety. It was about claiming expertise she doesn't possess. "Everyone exaggerates their qualifications a little bit on job applications," David said defensively. "It's standard practice in competitive industries." Exaggerating qualifications is saying you're proficient with software you're actually competent with, or claiming leadership experience when you've been a strong team member. It's not taking credit for someone else's creative work and strategic thinking. Hayley's composure finally cracked. "Fine, maybe I oversold my role in those projects. But you let me do it. You never corrected me when I talked about my creative collaborations at family dinners. You never said anything when I described my strategic input on those campaigns." She was right, and her accusation hit harder than I'd expected. I had listened to her embellish her role in my projects without correcting her, allowing her to build a professional narrative based on partial truths and inflated responsibilities. "You're right," I admitted. "I should have been clearer about your actual involvement from the beginning. But I never imagined you'd use those inflated descriptions to apply for senior creative positions you weren't qualified for." "Because you never told me I wasn't qualified," she shot back. "How was I supposed to know the difference between collaborative creative work and whatever distinction you're making now?" The question revealed something I hadn't fully considered. The possibility that Hayley genuinely believed her own version of events. Maybe she'd convinced herself that making client introductions and attending project meetings constituted creative collaboration. Maybe her portfolio claims weren't deliberately fraudulent, but rather the result of self-deception enabled by my silence. "Hayley, when you described your role as creative lead on the TechFlow rebrand, did you actually believe you'd been the creative lead?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw the truth. She'd known she was overselling her contributions, but she'd rationalized it as acceptable professional positioning, rather than acknowledging it as deception. "I believed I'd made meaningful contributions that warranted recognition," she said carefully. Meaningful contributions that warranted recognition was not the same as creative leadership, but I could see how she'd convinced herself they were equivalent. My mother seized on this distinction. "See, this is just a matter of different perspectives on the same collaborative work. Surely that's something that can be clarified without anyone being accused of dishonesty." They were determined to reframe this situation in a way that preserved Hayley's dignity and career prospects while requiring nothing from her in terms of accountability or personal growth. They wanted me to use my success to solve a problem that had resulted from her unwillingness to build success honestly. "What you're asking me to do," I said quietly, "is sacrifice my professional integrity to compensate for Hayley's professional dishonesty. You want me to risk my reputation with a potential client to help her escape the consequences of misrepresenting her qualifications." "We're asking you to help your sister," my father said firmly. "Isn't that what family does?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Isn't that what family does? My father's words carried the weight of every guilt trip, every expectation, every unspoken rule about loyalty that had governed our relationships for decades. But before I could answer, I realized they still didn't understand the full scope of what family had meant to me or what I'd been doing for them while they dismissed my worth. I reached for my phone and opened a financial app that I'd never shown anyone before. You want to know what family does, Dad? Let me show you what this family member has been doing. I pulled up a spreadsheet I'd created 3 years ago to track something I'd never intended anyone to see. A comprehensive record of every financial favor, discount, waived fee, and hidden subsidy I'd provided to my family since Crimson Creative Agency became profitable. Zenith Fitness, where you and Mom have had memberships for the past 4 years, I began, reading from my phone. You think you're paying $89 per month each because you negotiated a good family rate. The actual membership cost is $180 per month each. My company redesigned their entire brand identity in exchange for lifetime family memberships at cost. I've saved you $14,560 over 4 years. My parents exchanged glances, my mother's mouth slightly open. Grandview Gardens, where Hayley and David had their engagement party last year. You remember how thrilled Hayley was that they offered her their new client special, 40% off the venue rental? There is no new client special. I handled their complete digital marketing overhaul 6 months before Hayley's event. The discount was my professional fee applied to her celebration. That saved you $3,200. Hayley was staring at me with something approaching horror. You arranged that? Riverside Commons, the apartment complex where you and David live. Remember how the leasing manager mentioned that your application was approved, despite your debt-to-income ratio being slightly above their usual standards, and how your security deposit was mysteriously reduced to half the normal amount? I scrolled through more entries. My company designed their website and digital presence last year. The leasing accommodations were part of our professional relationship. David's face had gone pale. Our rent is exactly what you're paying, but your approval process and security deposit reduction represented about $2,800 in savings that you never would have received without my involvement. I continued down the list, each entry representing hours of my work and professional relationships that had been leveraged to make my family's lives easier, more affordable, and more comfortable. Morrison and Associates, where Hayley works. They became one of my clients 18 months ago when they needed creative services for their biggest account pitch. As part of that relationship, I specifically requested that they consider Hayley for internal advancement opportunities. Her promotion to senior account coordinator last year wasn't just based on her performance. I'd created a professional environment where her growth was encouraged. The silence in the room was deafening. Hayley looked like she might be sick. Maplewood Country Club, where you've been members for 6 years, Dad. You've always been proud of your golf handicap and Mom's tennis league participation. The membership fees you've been paying are $400 per month instead of the standard $800, because the club hired Crimson Creative for their complete rebrand 3 years ago. I specifically negotiated family membership benefits as part of our payment structure. My father was gripping the arm of his chair. Natalie, we had no idea. Sterling Travel, the agency you used for your anniversary cruise to Alaska last year. Mom, you remember how excited you were about the luxury suite upgrade and the shore excursion package that came, quote, complimentary with your booking? Sterling is one of my clients. I arranged for your entire trip to be provided at cost, plus a small margin. What you paid $4,500 for would have cost anyone else $8,200. I scrolled through more entries. Restaurant discounts at establishments my company had worked with, priority reservations at venues where I had professional relationships, expedited service for everything from home repairs to medical appointments, all facilitated through the network I'd built while they assumed I was struggling to find clients. Evergreen Medical Center, where you had your knee surgery last year, Mom. Dr. Patterson is married to the CEO of Hartwell Industries, one of my biggest clients. Your surgery was scheduled within 2 weeks instead of the usual 6-month wait because I made a phone call. The insurance adjustment that reduced your out-of-pocket costs by $3,000 was Dr. Patterson's professional courtesy extended because of my client relationship. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God! The private room, the premium meal service, the extended physical therapy sessions, all arranged through professional relationships you never knew I had. I set my phone down and watched as the full implications settled over them. For 8 years, while they'd been worrying about my financial stability and gently suggesting I consider more practical career options, I'd been the invisible force making their comfortable lifestyle possible. The total value of direct financial benefits I've provided to this family over the past 5 years is $127,000, I said quietly. That doesn't include the networking facilitation, the professional opportunities, or the countless small favors that you attributed to good luck, excellent timing, or your own negotiation skills. Hayley was crying now, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. We never asked you to do any of this. No, you didn't ask. You just accepted it. Every discount, every upgrade, every convenient exception to normal policies. You accepted it all, while treating me like the family member who hadn't figured out how to be successful. David spoke for the first time in several minutes. Why didn't you tell us? If you were helping us this much, why let us think? Because I wanted to know who you were when you thought I had nothing to offer. I wanted to see if you'd love and respect me based on who I am, not what I could do for you. I gestured around the room. And now I know. My father was steadying his hands. We do love you, Natalie. We've always loved you. You love me enough to worry about me when you think I'm failing. You love me enough to include me in family gatherings when you think I need support. But you don't love me enough to respect my dreams when they conflict with your immediate wants. You don't love me enough to consider my feelings when making decisions that affect things I've told you matter to me. I stood up and began gathering my documents. Hayley stole the name I've been planning to use for my future daughter and gave it to her dog. Then she justified it by saying my life plans were unrealistic fantasies because I'm 32 and single. That tells me exactly how much my dreams matter to this family. That was different, Hayley protested weakly. I didn't know about all of this. You knew I'd been talking about naming my daughter Autumn for 12 years. You knew it mattered to me. Your financial situation or career status had nothing to do with that decision. You just decided your dog deserved my daughter's name more than my future child did. My mother stood up, reaching toward me. Sweetheart, we can work through this. Now that we understand everything, we can do better. Can you? Because 5 minutes ago, you were all strategizing about how to use my professional reputation to help Hayley escape the consequences of her professional dishonesty. Even after learning that I've been subsidizing your lifestyles for years, your first instinct was to figure out how my success could solve your problems. The room fell silent again. They couldn't deny it because we'd all been part of that conversation. I've spent 8 years proving that family does help family, even when that help goes unrecognized and unappreciated, I said, slipping my portfolio under my arm. I've made your lives easier, more comfortable, and more successful while you looked down on my choices and dismissed my dreams. I headed toward the door, then turned back. Now it's time for you to prove what family means to you. And I'm not talking about what you can do for me. I'm talking about who you can be when you're not getting anything in return. The last thing I heard as I left was Hayley calling my name, but I didn't stop. Some conversations, I'd learned, were more productive when people had time to think about what they'd just discovered about themselves. The week following my revelation passed in a strange, suspended silence. No calls from my parents asking about my well-being. No texts from Hayley updating me on her job search or sharing photos of Autumn's latest antics. No group family messages about upcoming birthdays or holiday planning. For the first time in my adult life, my family was giving me space. Though whether from respect, shock, or simply not knowing what to say, I couldn't tell. I spent those quiet days making decisions that would fundamentally alter our relationships going forward. Starting Monday morning, I began the process of unwinding 8 years of hidden financial support and professional favors that had become so woven into their daily lives they'd forgotten what their actual circumstances looked like without my intervention. The first call was to Marcus Hoffman at Zenith Fitness. Marcus, I need to discuss the Morrison family memberships. Effective next month, I'd like to transition their accounts to standard pricing. The brand identity project is complete, and it's time to normalize our business relationship. Marcus was professional but confused. Of course, Natalie. Should I notify them of the rate change, or would you prefer to handle that communication? Please send them the standard notification letter. They'll need time to decide if they want to continue their memberships at full price or explore other options. Similar conversations followed throughout the week. Riverside Commons would need to process Hayley and David's lease renewal at standard rates, without the special accommodations I'd arranged. Sterling Travel would no longer extend cost-plus pricing to my family members. Grandview Gardens would treat future Morrison family events as standard commercial bookings. Most significantly, I called Amanda Rodriguez at Pinnacle Design Studios. Amanda, I wanted to follow up on our conversation about collaboration opportunities. I'm interested in exploring a consulting relationship, but I need to clarify something about my availability. Of course, Natalie. We're very excited about the possibility of working with Crimson Creative. I'm fully available for legitimate business relationships, but I won't be providing any recommendations or interventions related to Hayley Morrison's employment prospects. I want to ensure there's no confusion about the separation between my professional services and personal relationships. Amanda paused diplomatically. I understand completely. Our interest in Crimson Creative is based entirely on your company's portfolio and reputation, not on any external relationships. By Friday, I'd created what I privately called my Family Independence Plan, a comprehensive withdrawal from the financial and professional entanglements that had allowed my family to live above their actual means while looking down on my career choices. It wasn't punishment, it was boundary setting. They would now experience their lives at the level their own income and professional networks could support. That evening, as I was reviewing quarterly projections in my office, my phone rang with a call I'd been expecting all week. My mother's contact photo appeared on the screen, the formal family portrait from Hayley's wedding where everyone looked happy and successful. Hi, Mom. Natalie, sweetheart, we need to talk. Your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking this week about everything you shared with us. Her voice had a careful quality that suggested she'd rehearsed this conversation, possibly with input from Dad and Hayley. I'm listening. We realize we've made some serious mistakes in how we've understood and supported your career over the years. We want to make things right, but we're not sure how to move forward. I waited for her to continue, curious about what making things right looked like from their perspective. We're hoping you'll come to dinner Sunday so we can discuss this as a family. There are things we need to say, apologies we need to make, and we'd like to figure out how to rebuild our relationships on a better foundation. What does that look like to you, Mom? A better foundation? She hesitated. Well, obviously we want to acknowledge your incredible success and make sure you know how proud we are of what you've built. We also want to understand how we can support you better going forward. Support me better going forward. The phrase carried undertones of reciprocity that made me cautious. And what about the specific issues that led to our conversation last Saturday? Another pause. You mean about Hayley's job situation and the baby name? I mean about the pattern of disrespect, the conditional nature of your approval, and the expectation that I should use my success to solve problems created by Hayley's professional dishonesty. Natalie, I think those are exactly the kinds of things we need to discuss in person. There's a lot to work through, and some of it is complicated. Complicated. That was an interesting way to describe theft and fraud. Mom, before I agree to Sunday dinner, I need you to understand that some things have changed permanently. I won't be continuing the financial arrangements and professional favors that have been supporting this family for the past 8 years. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. What do you mean exactly? She finally asked. I mean that starting next month, your gym memberships will be billed at standard rates. Hayley and David's lease will be processed like any other tenants. Family travel, medical accommodations, restaurant reservations, and all the other benefits you've been receiving through my professional network, those are ending. But sweetheart, surely we can work out some arrangement that's fair to everyone. You've been so generous and we're grateful, but you'd like the generosity to continue now that you know it exists? That's not what I meant. I just think it would be better to make these kinds of changes gradually, as part of a broader conversation about how we rebuild our family relationships. There it was. They wanted to negotiate the terms of my boundary setting, to find a middle ground that preserved some of the benefits they'd grown accustomed to while offering me the improved family dynamics I'd been seeking. Mom, this isn't a negotiation. These changes are happening regardless of whether we rebuild our relationships or not. The question is whether we can develop genuine, respectful connections that aren't based on financial interdependence. Of course we want genuine relationships, honey. But don't you think it's a little extreme to cut off all family assistance? We're not strangers. We're your parents and your sister. And as my parents and sister, you'll be treated with the same love and consideration I'd show to anyone I care about. But you won't receive preferential business treatment or financial subsidies that you didn't know existed and never acknowledged. I could hear her breathing, processing the implications. What about Hayley's situation with the Autumn name and the job interview? Are those things we can address? Hayley can choose whatever name she wants for her dog. It's too late to change that. As for her job search, she'll need to build her career based on her actual qualifications and experience, just like everyone else does. But you could help her, couldn't you, now that everything is out in the open? Could I help her? Certainly. I had the industry connections and professional credibility to open doors for Hayley if I chose to. But should I help someone who had demonstrated such casual disregard for professional ethics and personal boundaries? Mom, would you help someone who had stolen credit for your work and then applied for jobs based on that false portfolio? That's different. Hayley is family. Family members should be held to higher standards of honesty and respect, not lower ones. The conversation was circling back to the fundamental disagreement that had created this crisis in the first place. They wanted family membership to provide privileges and protections that weren't available to outsiders. I wanted family membership to come with higher expectations of integrity and consideration. Natalie, please don't make permanent decisions based on temporary hurt feelings. Come to dinner Sunday, let's work through this together. Temporary hurt feelings. 8 years of financial support dismissed as generosity. Professional fraud reframed as portfolio confusion. The theft of my future daughter's name minimized as a misunderstanding about dog naming. I'll come to dinner Sunday, I said finally. But I want you to understand that I'm not coming to negotiate boundaries or discuss compromises. I'm coming to explain the new terms of our relationships and to see if you can accept them. New terms? Yes. Terms that include honesty, respect, and accountability. Terms that don't include professional favors, financial subsidies, or tolerance for behavior that I wouldn't accept from anyone else in my life. And if we can't accept those terms? The question hung between us, heavy with implications neither of us wanted to explore fully. Then I guess we'll find out what this family looks like when it's based on genuine choice, rather than financial convenience. After hanging up, I stood at my office window looking out at the city lights, thinking about the conversation I'd just had and the one that awaited me on Sunday. My family wanted to rebuild our relationships, but they wanted to do it on terms that preserved their access to my success, while requiring minimal change in their behavior or attitudes. Sunday would determine whether they could love me enough to meet me on equal ground, or whether they'd rather lose me than lose the benefits of knowing me. Sunday arrived with an unexpected text from Hayley at 8:47 a.m. Nat, can you come an hour early? I need to talk to you alone before dinner. There are things I need to say that I can't say in front of everyone else. I stared at the message for several minutes, debating whether this was another attempt at manipulation or something genuinely different. The vulnerability in her request, admitting she couldn't say certain things in front of our parents, suggested the latter. I arrived at my parents' house at 4 p.m. instead of 5, finding Hayley waiting for me on the front porch swing, where we'd spent countless summer evenings as children. She looked different somehow, smaller, less polished, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual carefully curated outfit designed to project success and stability. "Thank you for coming early," she said as I sat down beside her. "I wasn't sure you would." I almost didn't. She nodded, accepting that honesty without defensiveness. "I've been thinking all week about what you said, about what I did, about what kind of person I've become." I waited, curious to see where this conversation would lead. "I need to start by acknowledging something I've been avoiding since last Saturday. You were right about my portfolio. I wasn't just exaggerating my contributions, I was lying about them." The admission hung between us, stark and unqualified. I told myself it was creative collaboration and strategic networking, but that was bullshit. I knew the difference between making client introductions and being a creative lead. I knew the difference between earning a finder's fee and deserving co-credit on award-winning campaigns. She turned to face me directly. "I lied to Pinnacle Design Studios about my qualifications. I lied to our family about my role in those projects. But worst of all, I lied to myself about what I was doing and why it was wrong." This was not the conversation I'd expected. No justifications, no requests for help, no attempts to minimize her actions. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I spent the week applying for business development positions, and I realized something horrible about myself. Every time I started to write a cover letter describing my actual experience and qualifications, I felt disappointed. Not in the job prospects, but in myself." She laughed bitterly. "I've been so focused on appearing successful that I forgot to actually become successful. I've been so busy taking credit for other people's work that I never developed the skills to create work worth taking credit for." I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulative sister who had justified stealing my daughter's name by dismissing my life plans as unrealistic fantasies. "That's a difficult realization to come to. It gets worse," she continued. "I've been thinking about the Autumn situation too, and I need to tell you the truth about that as well." My chest tightened. The dog name theft still felt like an open wound. "I didn't forget that you'd been planning to use that name for your future daughter. I remembered every conversation, every time you'd mentioned it over the years. I chose it anyway because," she paused, struggling with words. "Because why?" "Because I was jealous of how certain you seemed about your future. You talked about your daughter Autumn with such confidence, like you knew exactly who you were going to become and what your life would look like. I envied that certainty, and I wanted to take a piece of it for myself." The honesty was brutal and unexpected. "When I called you that night to tell you about the puppy, and you reminded me about your baby name plans, I felt this sick satisfaction for about 10 seconds. Like I'd proven that your dreams weren't any more real or important than mine." She was crying now, quiet tears that she didn't try to hide. But then I started thinking about what that meant about me as a person. I realized I'd stolen something precious from my sister because I was insecure about my own future. I'd hurt you deliberately to make myself feel more powerful, and that's... She shook her head. "That's not who I want to be." I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of anger I'd been carrying all week. "I can't undo naming the dog Autumn," she continued, "but I want you to know that if I could go back and make that decision again, knowing what I know now about how much it would hurt you, I wouldn't do it." "What changed?" I asked quietly. "A week ago you were justifying it by saying I was unrealistic about having children." A week ago, I was desperate to believe that my choices were reasonable and that anyone who was hurt by them was overreacting. But this week, when I really thought about what I'd done, she wiped her eyes. I realized I'd become someone who hurts people I love to protect my own ego. That's not the sister I want to be. And it's definitely not the person I want to raise children around. The reference to children hit differently now, coming from someone who was genuinely grappling with her own character rather than defending her actions. I applied for 3 business development positions this week, she said, changing the subject slightly. All of them are at least $40,000 less than what I was hoping to earn at Pinnacle, but they're based on my actual experience and skills. How does that feel? Scary, humbling, but also honest, I guess. For the first time in months, I'm not worried about being exposed as a fraud during an interview, because I'm not claiming to be something I'm not. She looked down at her hands. I also need to apologize for how our family has treated you over the years. I was part of that. When Mom and Dad would worry about your financial stability or suggest you needed to be more practical, I supported those conversations because it made me feel better about my own choices. This admission stung because it was something I'd suspected but never had confirmed. I liked being the successful sister, the one with the stable career and the practical life plan. Your struggles made my achievements feel more significant by comparison. Except I wasn't struggling. No, you weren't. You were building something incredible while I was building my identity around being better than what I thought you were. That's fucked up, Nat. That's really fucked up. The profanity felt appropriate for the magnitude of what she was describing. I don't know how to fix the damage I've done to our relationship, she continued. I don't know how to repair 8 years of condescension and dismissiveness and casual cruelty. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see what I've done, and I see who I've been, and I hate both of those things. I sat in silence for several minutes, processing this conversation and trying to reconcile it with the sister who had called me unrealistic and stolen my daughter's name just 10 days ago. What do you want from me, Hayley? Nothing, she said immediately. I mean, I want your forgiveness eventually, but I know I haven't earned that yet. I want to rebuild our relationship, but I know that might not be possible. Right now, I just want you to know that I understand what I did and why it was wrong. She stood up from the swing. I also want you to know that I'm not going to ask you for professional help or career favors. I need to build my own success based on my own merits, not on my sister's achievements. Even if that means earning less money and having fewer opportunities? Especially then. I need to know that whatever I accomplish is something I actually accomplished, not something you made possible for me. As we walked toward the house for dinner, I realized this was the first conversation I'd had with Hayley in years where she hadn't asked me for anything, hadn't tried to position herself as more successful than me, and hadn't made me feel like my dreams and feelings were secondary to her immediate needs. It was also the first time she'd acknowledged the person I actually was, rather than the person she needed me to be to make her feel better about herself. One more thing, she said as we reached the front door. I know you can't get your baby name back, and I know the damage to your career dreams can't be undone. But I want you to know that if you ever do have a daughter, and if you want to use the name Autumn, I'll figure out something else for the dog. It was never really mine to take. The offer was imperfect. The name would always carry the complication of being shared with a golden retriever, but the gesture behind it felt genuine. For the first time in 10 days, I felt hopeful that my sister might be capable of becoming someone I could actually respect. Dinner unfolded differently than any family gathering in recent memory. Instead of the usual performance of success and carefully managed conversations, we found ourselves navigating genuinely difficult territory, with a level of honesty that felt both uncomfortable and necessary. My parents had clearly prepared remarks, but Hayley's earlier conversation with me seemed to have shifted the dynamic in ways they hadn't anticipated. The carefully rehearsed apologies they'd planned felt inadequate in the face of the raw accountability she'd already provided. Natalie, my father began as we settled around the familiar dining room table, Your mother and I have done a lot of reflecting this week about how we've understood and supported your career over the years." He paused, glancing at my mother before continuing. "We realize we've made some fundamental mistakes in how we've perceived your success and valued your choices." The words felt genuine but cautious, as if he was testing how much honesty this conversation could handle. "We're proud of what you've built," my mother added. "We should have been proud all along, regardless of what we knew about your financial success. Your creativity, your independence, your willingness to follow your own path, those are qualities we should have celebrated instead of worried about." I appreciated the sentiment, but something about the phrasing bothered me. "Should have been proud" suggested that pride was contingent on achievement rather than an expression of unconditional love. "I need to ask you something directly," I said. "Are you proud of who I am, or are you impressed by what I've accomplished?" The distinction seemed to catch them off guard. "Both," my father said after a moment, "but I think we've been confusing those two things for years." "How do you mean?" My mother leaned forward. "We told ourselves we were worried about your stability because we loved you and wanted you to be secure. But I think we were actually worried about how your choices reflected on us as parents." The admission was more honest than I'd expected. When other parents talked about their children's promotions and salaries and traditional markers of success, we felt defensive about your unconventional path. We wanted to be able to brag about you the way they bragged about their kids. "So you tried to push me toward achievements that would be easier to explain at dinner parties?" "Yes," my father said simply, "and that was selfish and wrong." David, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. "I think I owe you an apology too, Natalie. I supported Hayley's version of events about her career and the baby name situation because it was easier than questioning whether she was being fair to you." His honesty surprised me. Throughout this entire situation, David had been the family member I'd thought about least, seeing him as a passive supporter of Hayley's choices rather than an active participant in the dynamics. "I knew Hayley's portfolio claims were optimistic," he continued. "I helped her prepare for the Pinnacle interview, and I could see that she didn't have the technical knowledge or creative experience her resume suggested. But I didn't want to undermine her confidence, so I focused on helping her present herself better rather than encouraging her to be more honest about her qualifications." Hayley looked at him with something approaching gratitude. "David's been trying to protect me from consequences I should have faced years ago." "How do you mean?" I asked. "The credit card debt from maintaining our lifestyle, the stress of living beyond our means, the anxiety about being exposed as less qualified than I claimed to be. David absorbed all of that with me instead of helping me face reality." She reached for his hand. "I put him in an impossible position, support my dishonesty and watch me struggle, or tell me the truth and risk our relationship." David squeezed her hand. "I chose supporting you over honesty, and that wasn't fair to either of us. It definitely wasn't fair to Natalie." The conversation was becoming more therapeutic than I'd anticipated, with everyone acknowledging not just their actions but their motivations and the systemic patterns that had enabled this situation. "I need to share something with all of you," I said, feeling ready for a level of vulnerability I'd been avoiding. Part of why I kept my success secret for so long was because I was afraid of exactly what happened last week. They looked confused. I was afraid that if you knew about my achievements and my financial situation, you'd suddenly become interested in me for the wrong reasons. That you'd start seeing me as someone who could solve your problems rather than someone whose problems you wanted to help solve. "And we proved that fear correct," my mother said quietly. "Within 5 minutes of learning about Crimson Creative Agency, you were strategizing about how I could help Hayley recover from her interview disaster. That told me that even after learning I'd been supporting you financially for years, your first instinct was to figure out how my success could benefit you." The silence that followed was heavy with recognition. "But here's what I've realized this week," I continued. "Keeping secrets to test people's love is just another form of manipulation. I was withholding information that might have changed our dynamics, then judging you for responding to incomplete information." Hayley frowned. But you had good reasons for keeping it secret. I had understandable reasons, but good reasons for manipulation are still manipulation. If I'd been honest about my success from the beginning, we might have worked through these issues years ago instead of letting them build up into something this destructive. My father nodded thoughtfully. So we're all responsible for creating a dynamic based on false assumptions and hidden information. Yes. And if we're going to rebuild our relationships, we need to start with complete honesty about who we are and what we want from each other. I looked around the table at my family, flawed, complicated people who had hurt me and disappointed me, but who were also capable of growth and genuine love. I want a family that celebrates each other's successes without competition or comparison. I want relationships where we can disagree about choices without withdrawing love and support. I want to feel safe sharing my dreams and plans without worrying that they'll be dismissed or stolen. What does that look like practically? David asked. It means no more financial subsidies or professional favors that you don't know about. If I help you with something, it'll be transparent and reciprocal. It means respecting each other's boundaries and choices, even when we don't understand them. And it means accountability when we hurt each other, not just apologies when we get caught. My mother was nodding. Those seem like reasonable expectations for any healthy relationship. They are, but they're also different from how this family has operated for years. The question is whether we can all commit to that level of honesty and respect, even when it's uncomfortable. Hayley spoke up. I got a job offer this week. Business development coordinator at a marketing firm in the city. It's $47,000 a year, which is about half what I was hoping to earn at Pinnacle. The announcement surprised everyone. I took it, she continued, because it's based on my actual qualifications, and because I need to prove to myself that I can succeed without lying about my abilities or relying on professional favors I didn't earn. How does that feel? I asked. Scary, humbling, but also like the first honest professional decision I've made in years. My father raised his wine glass. I'd like to propose a toast. To Hayley, for choosing integrity over income. To Natalie, for setting boundaries that forced us all to grow. And to our family, for having the courage to rebuild something broken, instead of pretending it was fine. As we clinked glasses, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years during a family gathering. Genuine optimism about our future relationships. Not because our problems were solved, but because we'd finally acknowledged them honestly and committed to doing better. There's one more thing, Hayley said as we finished dinner. David and I have been talking about getting married next spring, and I want to ask if you'll be my maid of honor. Not because of your connections or your ability to help with costs, but because you're my sister, and I want you standing beside me when I start this new chapter of my life. The request felt different from any family invitation I'd received in years, wanted for who I was rather than what I could provide. I'd be honored, I said, meaning it completely. 6 months later, I stood in the bridal suite at Grandview Gardens, helping Hayley with the final adjustments to her wedding dress. The venue was the same one where she'd had her engagement party at a discounted rate I'd secretly arranged, but this time the relationship was completely transparent. Hayley and David had booked their wedding at full price and were genuinely proud of being able to afford the celebration they wanted. I can't believe you designed these invitations, Hayley said, holding up one of the elegant cards I'd created for their wedding. They're so much more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. The invitations had been my wedding gift to them, not a secret professional favor, but an openly offered contribution from sister to sister. Hayley had been nervous about accepting, worried that it violated our new boundaries around transparency and reciprocity. It's different when you ask honestly and I choose freely, I'd told her when she expressed those concerns. The problem was never that I helped the family. The problem was that you took help for granted while treating me poorly. Now, as I pinned a small tear in her dress, I reflected on how much our relationships had changed since that devastating Saturday when everything came to light. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. The first few months had involved difficult conversations, hurt feelings, and the awkward process of learning to interact without the hidden financial dependencies that had shaped our family dynamics for years. My parents had struggled initially with the adjustment to paying full price for their gym memberships, country club access, and medical accommodations. The increase in their monthly expenses had forced them to evaluate their priorities and make some uncomfortable budget decisions. "We never realized how much we'd been living above our means," my mother had admitted during one of our monthly coffee dates, a new tradition we'd started to maintain consistent communication. "It's been humbling to see what our lifestyle actually costs." But something unexpected had emerged from that financial adjustment. My father had started taking more pride in the memberships and activities he was paying for himself, and my mother had begun appreciating experiences more when they required genuine sacrifice rather than invisible subsidies. "I think I enjoy our country club more now that I know we're actually earning our membership," my father had said recently. "It feels like an achievement rather than a gift we didn't know we were receiving." Hayley's career transition had been even more dramatic. The business development coordinator position had started at $47,000, exactly as she'd mentioned at our family dinner 6 months ago. But her honesty about her qualifications and her commitment to building legitimate skills had impressed her new employers in ways that false credentials never could have. "I got promoted to senior coordinator last month," she'd told me proudly. "It's only a $6,000 raise, but it's based on actual performance metrics and client feedback. My supervisor said I have a natural talent for relationship building and strategic thinking that they want to develop further." Watching her discover and cultivate her genuine strengths had been one of the most rewarding aspects of our family's transformation. Instead of trying to fake expertise in creative direction, Hayley was building real competence in areas where she had natural ability. "The ironic thing is that I'm happier earning less money honestly than I ever was trying to maintain a lifestyle I couldn't afford," she'd reflected during one of our sister lunches. Another new tradition that had emerged from our rebuilt relationship. David had flourished alongside her, no longer carrying the stress of maintaining financial lies or supporting professional deception. Their relationship had become more authentic as they learned to face challenges together rather than avoiding them through manipulation or hidden assistance. "David says I'm a completely different person now," Hayley had shared. "More confident, less anxious, more generous with other people because I'm not constantly worried about protecting my own image." The change in Hayley had been perhaps the most profound of all our family transformations. The sister who had stolen my baby name out of jealousy and insecurity had evolved into someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with. Someone whose company I sought out because I liked who she was, not because family obligation required it. "Natalie," she said now, turning from the mirror where she'd been applying her final touches of makeup, "I have something for you." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box. "I know tradition says the bride doesn't give gifts to the maid of honor, but this isn't about tradition." I opened the box to find a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant in the shape of an autumn leaf. "I saw it last month and thought about everything that happened with Autumn's name," she said, using the dog's name naturally and without defensiveness. "I can't give you back the name, but I wanted you to have something that honors your dreams about your future daughter." The gesture was thoughtful and painful in equal measure, acknowledging the loss while celebrating the hope. "There's something else," she continued. "David and I have been talking about starting a family in a few years, and if we have a daughter, we'd like to name her something that honors you, not Autumn. That will always belong to your future child, even if you end up sharing it with a golden retriever. But something that represents the sister who taught me what integrity looks like." I felt tears starting, surprising myself with the intensity of emotion the offer provoked. "What name were you thinking?" "Grace. Because you showed me what it means. To extend grace to people who don't deserve it, and then to require them to become worthy of it." The name was perfect, meaningful without being derivative, honoring our relationship without creating new complications. I'd be deeply honored. As we prepared to leave for the ceremony, I caught sight of myself in the mirror, wearing a bridesmaid dress I'd chosen freely, supporting a sister who'd asked honestly for my participation, celebrating a relationship that was based on genuine affection rather than obligation or manipulation. The woman in the mirror looked different from the person who'd received that devastating phone call about the baby shower 7 months ago. More confident, more boundaried, but also more hopeful about the possibility of authentic family relationships. "Ready?" Hayley asked, linking her arm through mine. "Ready?" The ceremony was beautiful in a way that felt earned rather than performed. Hayley and David exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to support each other's growth rather than enabling each other's weaknesses. My parents looked genuinely proud, not of the social status the wedding represented, but of the people their daughter and son-in-law had become. During the reception, I found myself genuinely enjoying conversations with relatives who now knew about my professional success, but were more interested in talking about my creative process than my bank account. The revelation of my achievements had shifted family dynamics in positive ways I hadn't anticipated. "I always knew you were talented," my Aunt Patricia said, "but I never realized you'd built something so impressive. Your parents talk about Crimson Creative Agency with such pride now." They did talk about my work with pride, but it was different from the surface-level boasting I'd feared. They'd taken the time to understand what I'd built and why it mattered, rather than simply being impressed by its financial success. As the evening wound down, I stood on the garden terrace where Hayley and I had talked that first honest conversation 6 months ago. The autumn air was crisp and full of promise, carrying the scent of changing leaves and new beginnings. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Rodriguez at Pinnacle Design Studios. "Natalie, wanted to update you that the Crimson Creative Partnership has exceeded all our expectations. Our executive team would like to discuss expanding our collaboration next quarter. Also, we recently hired an excellent business development coordinator who mentioned you as a professional reference. Hayley Morrison. Small world. Looking forward to our continued partnership." I smiled, realizing that Hayley had managed to create her own connection with Pinnacle through her legitimate qualifications and professional network. She'd achieved the industry recognition she'd always wanted, but she'd earned it honestly. Autumn, the golden retriever, bounded up to me across the garden, tail wagging enthusiastically. At 8 months old, she'd grown into a beautiful, intelligent dog who brought joy to everyone she met. The name suited her perfectly, and I'd found that my future daughter could share it without the emotional devastation I'd initially felt. Some names, I'd learned, were big enough for both dreams and reality. As I bent down to pet Autumn, I thought about the future daughter who would someday carry that name alongside a golden retriever who'd inadvertently taught our entire family about the importance of honesty, respect, and genuine love. Both would be part of a family that had learned to value integrity over image and authentic connection over convenient harmony. That future daughter, whenever she arrived, would grow up with an aunt who'd learned to fight for her own worth, grandparents who'd learned to love without conditions, and a family who understood that respect isn't something you can fake, steal, or substitute for. She'd also grow up knowing that her name had a story, a complicated, beautiful story about boundaries, forgiveness, and the difference between loving someone and respecting them. That seemed like exactly the right foundation for a little girl named Autumn. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.